Chapter 3. The First Fairy Tales. Next, Hans took a trip around Denmark. He met a girl and fell in love, but she didn't love him. Hans felt terrible. Back in Copenhagen, a writer made fun of Hans' writing. Hans felt even worse. Then his friends said he didn't write well. They said he should grow up. Poor Hans was glad when the king gave him money for a long trip. He went all over Europe. He liked Italy best. On his trip to Italy, Hans visited Rome. When Hans got home, he stopped listening to his friends. He just wrote the way he wanted to write. He wrote a book about Italy. He wrote 4 fairy tales. Then he wrote another book and 3 more fairy tales. Hans made these drawings of places in Rome while he was visiting Italy. At first, Hans said the tales weren't important, but he kept writing them. He knew the tales were important to him. The Little Mermaid moved me deeply, he said. Children knew the tales were important too. They loved Hans and gave him flowers. A statue of Andersen's Little Mermaid sits on a rock in the harbor of Copenhagen. The artist Willem Petersen drew this illustration of the Little Mermaid for Hans's story. Hans loved to read his fairy tales to young people. Then older people began to see that Hans was a fine writer. The government promised to give him money each year for the rest of his life. Hans would never be poor again. This portrait of Hans Christian Andersen was painted by C.A. Jensen.